Imagine being born into one of the most famous families on earth. Not just famous, but royal. Your destiny seemingly preordained. A life of palaces, privilege, and public adoration awaiting you. You are your parents' only daughter, a symbol of hope and continuity, expected to be the very pride of Windsor. Now imagine that glittering destiny slowly, inexorably turning into something else entirely. A life not of boundless joy, but of quiet duty, personal sacrifice, and a profound, almost unimaginable series of private tragedies. You are a princess, yet you become a silent witness to the undoing of your own family, watching your beloved brothers endure crisis, abdicate thrones, or die. Far too young, you are surrounded by people, yet you end up feeling utterly alone. This is the story of Princess Mary, Princess Royal and Countess of Herwood. She was born into a world of immense power and gilded cages, the only daughter of King George V and Queen Mary. She was meant to be the sparkling gem of the House of Windsor, but her life unfolded as a poignant narrative of duty, disappointment, and an almost unbearable burden of grief. How did the pride of Windsor become a woman trapped in a cold marriage, who silently watched two of her adored younger brothers die tragically young, leaving her to face her twilight years in profound solitude? What quiet battles did she fight behind her regal smile? And what secrets did she carry in her heart? Today we delve into the extraordinary yet often overlooked life of Princess Mary, a woman who epitomized the contradictions of royalty, immense privilege intertwined with immense personal pain. Let's uncover the untold story of the only daughter, the steadfast sister, and the forgotten Princess Royal. Our story begins not in a grand, sprawling palace, but in a surprisingly modest house on the Sandringham estate in Norfolk called York Cottage. It was here, on April 25, 1897, during the Diamond Jubilee year of her great-grandmother, Queen Victoria, that Victoria Alexandra Alice Mary was born. Her parents were the Duke and Duchess of York, the future King George V and Queen Mary. While the world saw them as figures of immense imperial power, their private life at York Cottage was one of almost middle-class austerity, governed by a rigid, unbending routine that would define their children's lives. The world Mary was born into was the British Empire at its absolute apex of vast global dominion, painted red on the map. It was an age of supreme confidence of steamships and telegraphs, an era where the social order seemed as fixed and eternal as the stars. At the head of this order was the royal family, symbols of continuity and divine right stability. But within the walls of York Cottage, life was far from glamorous. Her father, George, was at heart a simple man, a career naval officer who had been thrust into the role of heir after the sudden death of his older brother. He was a man of routine, obsessed with punctuality and stamp collecting, possessing a fierce temper that could erupt at the slightest provocation. He was not a man given to intellectual pursuits or displays of emotion. He famously once declared, "I was always afraid of my mother. I am still more afraid of my wife." He ran his family like he ran a battleship, with strict discipline and an expectation of absolute obedience. His wife, Mary of Teck, was his intellectual and emotional superior. A woman of formidable intelligence, deep historical knowledge, and an intensely regal bearing. Yet she too was a product of a formal, emotionally restrained upbringing. She loved her children deeply, but her love was expressed through meticulous oversight of their education and well-being, not through warm hugs or spontaneous affection. She was shy, reserved, and believed, like her husband, that a royal child's first and only duty was to the crown. The result was a family environment that was loving in its own way, but emotionally stark. The children were raised primarily by nannies and tutors. They saw their parents for a brief formal period each day, an appointment they were expected to attend, scrubbed, polished, and on their best behavior. It was in this crucible of duty, discipline, and emotional restraint that the only daughter, Princess Mary, was forged. Mary was the third child and only girl, an island of femininity in a sea of boisterous brothers. She was sandwiched between the two future kings, the charismatic, impossibly handsome heir, Edward, known as David, born in 1894, and the shy, sensitive Albert, or Bertie, born in 1895. Two more brothers, Henry and George, would follow, creating a bustling, competitive nursery. From the very beginning, Mary's role was unique. As the only girl, she was both cherished and, in some ways, isolated. She learned early on to navigate the complex dynamics of her brothers' differing personalities, often acting as a quiet mediator or a confidant. Her bond with David, the future Edward VIII, was particularly strong in their early years. He was the dazzling star of the family, adored by the public and possessing a natural charm that could captivate anyone. He was also fiercely protective of his younger sister. He would champion her causes in the nursery, and she in turn adored him, looking up to her glamorous older brother with a mixture of awe and deep affection. This early bond would make his later choices and their eventual estrangement all the more painful for her. Her relationship with Bertie, the future George VI, was of a different nature. Bertie was plagued by insecurities. He was naturally left-handed but forced to write with his right. He suffered from chronic stomach ailments, and most debilitatingly, he developed a severe stammer that made public speaking an agonizing ordeal. He was often overshadowed by the confident David and subject to the impatient temper of their father. Mary developed a deeply protective, almost maternal feeling for Bertie. She was his ally, a source of quiet comfort and unwavering support in a family that often prized strength above all else. She understood his sensitivity and his deep well of inner goodness. This bond of quiet empathy would become one of the cornerstones of her life, particularly when Bertie was unexpectedly thrust onto the throne. She was a typical tomboy in many ways, holding her own amidst her brother's games. She loved the outdoors, particularly the vast, wind-swept grounds of Sandringham. She became an accomplished horsewoman, a passion she shared with her brother Henry, and developed a keen interest in the workings of the estate, often accompanying her father on his inspections. This practical, grounded side of her nature was a direct inheritance from her father, a side that often went unseen beneath her serene, princess-like exterior. Her education under the guidance of her governess, Mademoiselle Cécile Dussault, was rigorous but limited. She learned languages and the arts, but the curriculum was designed to create a polished royal consort, not an independent thinker. Her true education came from observing the intricate workings of the court and her family's unwavering dedication to their public role. She learned that for a Windsor, life was not about personal happiness, but about service. But there was another brother, a secret prince, whose short, tragic life would cast a long shadow over the family and leave a deep, indelible mark on Princess Mary's heart. In 1905, the royal couple had their sixth and final child, Prince John. From an early age, it was clear that Johnny, as he was known, was different. He was a bright and charming little boy, but he suffered from what we now know was epilepsy. His first seizure occurred when he was just 4 years old. In the early 20th century, epilepsy was a deeply misunderstood condition shrouded in stigma and fear. It was often associated with mental deficiency and seen as a shameful family secret, something to be hidden away. For the royal family, whose very existence depended on projecting an image of physical perfection and robust continuity, Prince John's illness was a private crisis. As his seizures became more frequent and severe, and as signs of what might have been developmental delays became more apparent, a heart-wrenching decision was made. Around 1916, when he was 11 years old, Prince John was effectively removed from the royal household and the public eye. He was sent to live at Wood Farm, a secluded house on the Sandringham estate under the full-time care of his devoted nanny, Charlotte Lala Bill. He was given his own little world, a garden to play in, and local children as companions. His parents visited when they could, but he was largely separated from the family, a secret kept from a public that barely knew he existed. It was a decision born of the medical advice and social prejudices of the time, but it was a brutal and lonely fate for a little boy. Of all his siblings, it was Princess Mary who made the most consistent and heartfelt effort to remain a part of Johnny's life. As a teenager, she would make the journey to Wood Farm regularly. She would play with him, read to him, and take him for walks. She was one of the few links he had to the family he had been born into. She saw past his illness to the affectionate, often mischievous boy within. She refused to let him be completely forgotten. This speaks volumes about her character, her innate compassion, and her deep sense of familial loyalty, even when that loyalty ran counter to the cold protocols of the court. On January 18, 1919, after a severe seizure, Prince John died peacefully in his sleep. He was just 13 years old. The news was made public, but the full story of his secluded life was not for the family. It was a profound grief, tinged with the complex emotions of guilt and relief. Queen Mary wrote in her diary, "It is a great shock, though for the poor little boy's restless soul, death came as a great release." But for Mary, who had made a special effort to know and love her forgotten brother, the loss was acute. It was the first of the great personal tragedies that would punctuate her life. A sorrow that taught her early on about the fragility of life and the immense pain that could hide behind the stately facade of the monarchy. As Mary emerged from her teenage years, the world was on the brink of war. The quiet rhythms of her life, lessons with her governess, walks with her father, and secret visits to her brother Johnny were about to be replaced by the urgent, all-consuming demands of a nation in crisis. Having been presented at court, and now a young woman, the expectations upon her were immense. She was the king's only daughter, a symbol of British womanhood, expected to be a model of grace, piety, and unwavering patriotism. The outbreak of the First World War in August 1914 was the moment she and her entire generation were forced to grow up overnight. The conflict was not a distant colonial affair. It was a total war that demanded the mobilization of the entire nation. For Mary, then just 17, the war provided an unexpected and in some ways liberating sense of purpose. While her older brothers, David and Bertie, were serving in the military. David frustratingly kept from the front lines due to his status as heir, and Bertie seeing action as a naval officer at the Battle of Jutland. Mary was determined to do her part on the home front. She resisted the initial suggestions of purely ceremonial roles and insisted on undertaking meaningful work. Following in the footsteps of her great-aunt, Princess Christian, she began training as a nurse with the Voluntary Aid Detachment, or VAD. Her chosen hospital was the Great Ormond Street Hospital for Sick Children in London. This was no gentle pastime. She learned the grueling realities of nursing, changing dressings, comforting grievously wounded soldiers who were temporarily housed there, and working long, exhausting shifts. For the first time, the sheltered princess was confronted with the raw, brutal human cost of the conflict. She saw firsthand the suffering of the young men brought back from the trenches, and the experience forged in her a deep and lasting empathy. It stripped away the last vestiges of her sheltered childhood and replaced them with a quiet, steely pragmatism. But her most famous contribution was a project born of her own initiative. In the autumn of 1914, she launched a public appeal to fund a Christmas gift for every single soldier and sailor serving under the king's colors. The idea was simple but profound. To send a personal token from the nation and from the king's daughter to the men on the front lines, a small reminder that they were not forgotten. The public response was overwhelming. The fund raised over £162,000, a colossal sum at the time. This allowed for the creation of Princess Mary's Christmas gift box. It was a small brass box embossed with an image of the princess and the names of the allied nations. Inside was a pipe, a lighter, a 1-ounce packet of tobacco, and 20 cigarettes. For non-smokers and boys, the box contained a pencil and a packet of sweets. And for Indian troops, candy and spices. The logistical challenge of producing and distributing millions of these boxes was immense. But Mary oversaw the project with meticulous care. The boxes reached the trenches of the Western Front, the decks of battleships in the North Sea, and even prisoner-of-war camps in Germany. The effect on morale was electric for the ordinary soldier, cold, wet, and facing death on a daily basis. This small personal gift was a powerful symbol that the nation and the royal family cared. It was a brilliant piece of public relations, but for Mary, it was a deeply personal mission, a way to connect directly with the men who were fighting and dying for her father's empire. As she grew into a young woman against the backdrop of global conflict, the pride of Windsor was proving to be more than just a pretty face. She was a woman of substance, compassion, and profound duty. The quiet girl from the royal nursery was becoming a pillar of strength, a role she would be forced to inhabit for the rest of her long and often tragic life. When the guns finally fell silent on the Western Front in November 1918, a wave of exhausted, almost hysterical relief swept across Britain. The nation had been bled white, losing nearly 1 million men. And the world that emerged from the rubble was profoundly and permanently changed. For Princess Mary, the end of the war coincided with the beginning of her own adult life. The quiet, beautiful girl who had rolled bandages and packed Christmas boxes was now a woman of 21, a highly visible and deeply respected member of the royal family. But the post-war world was a bewildering place. The old deference to the aristocracy had been eroded in the shared trauma of the trenches, and a new frenetic energy was taking hold. This was the dawn of the Jazz Age, an era of cocktails, shorter hemlines, and a frantic desire to live for the moment, while a new generation of bright young things scandalized society with their wild parties and flagrant disregard for the old rules. The House of Windsor doubled down on its commitment to tradition, duty, and respectability. King George V, a man who loathed change in all its forms, saw it as his solemn duty to provide a steadfast moral anchor in a world of drift. And in this mission, his only daughter, Princess Mary, was his most valuable asset. She embodied all the virtues he held dear. She was modest, dignified, deeply devout, and possessed an unshakable sense of duty. In the years immediately following the war, Mary stepped fully into her public role. She became the president of the Girl Guides Association, a patronage she would hold for over 40 years, and took on numerous other charities, particularly those related to nursing and women's services. She became a counselor of state, meaning she could perform the sovereign's official duties in his absence. A sign of the immense trust her father placed in her, she traveled the country, opening hospitals, reviewing troops, and lending her quiet, reassuring presence to a nation struggling to heal. She was the perfect princess, a calming symbol of continuity in a world of jarring change. But behind this impeccable public facade, a deeply personal and pressing question loomed large: the matter of her marriage. The pressure on the king's only daughter to marry was immense. In a world where the great royal houses of Russia, Germany, and Austria-Hungary had been swept away by war and revolution, a British royal wedding was seen as a powerful statement of stability and tradition. The public, starved for good news and romantic pageantry after 4 years of grim headlines, was desperate for a fairy tale. Newspapers were filled with speculation. Would she marry a foreign prince, strengthening diplomatic ties? Or would she choose a British nobleman, a patriotic match to bolster national pride? For Mary, however, the matter was far more complex than public spectacle. She was a woman of deep feeling, and the prospect of a purely dynastic, loveless marriage must have been a daunting one. There have long been persistent, though unproven, rumors that Mary's heart was already engaged elsewhere. The object of her affection was said to be Captain Lord Joey Lee, a handsome and decorated war hero who served as an equerry to her brother, the Prince of Wales, and later to her father. He was a frequent visitor to the palace, a trusted member of the royal household, and by all accounts, a man of great charm and integrity. A romance, if it existed, would have been conducted in the stolen glances and quiet conversations possible within the rigid confines of the court. But Joey Lee, for all his fine qualities, was not considered a suitable match for the king's daughter. He was the second son of a baron, a respectable title, but he lacked the vast wealth and ducal standing expected for a royal consort. King George V, a stickler for protocol and tradition, would never have counted in such a union. Whether it was an unspoken love or simply a deep, affectionate friendship, the connection was an impossible one. The story goes that the king gently but firmly put an end to any possibility of a match. A quiet but decisive act that underscored the brutal reality of Mary's position. Her heart was not her own to give. It belonged to the crown. This lost love, a poignant secret she may have carried for the rest of her life, adds a layer of profound tragedy to the marriage that was to come. It suggests that her subsequent union was not just an act of duty, but an act of profound personal sacrifice. The pressure intensified due to the behavior of her older brother David. The impossibly glamorous Prince of Wales, the most eligible bachelor in the world, showed absolutely no inclination to marry and settle down. He was embarking on a series of scandalous affairs with married women, causing his parents immense anxiety. With the heir shirking his primary dynastic duty, the burden fell on his younger siblings. Bertie was still years away from his own marriage, which left Mary as the next in line to provide the nation with a much-needed royal wedding. The search for a suitable husband began in earnest. The man who emerged as the frontrunner was Henry George Charles Lell Viscount Lells, the eldest son and heir of the 5th Earl of Herwood. On paper, he was the perfect candidate. He was 15 years older than Mary, a mature and steadying presence. His lineage was impeccable, and his family's wealth was almost beyond measure, derived from vast landholdings and West Indian sugar plantations. He was, in fact, one of the richest men in all of England. He was also a genuine war hero, having served with great distinction in the Grenadier Guards, being wounded 3 times and awarded the Distinguished Service Order and Bar and the French Croix de Guerre. He was a man of substance, a connoisseur of fine art, and a passionate countryman devoted to horse racing and hunting. But he was also a man known for his reserved, almost austere personality. He was not a society figure. He was shy, somewhat awkward in conversation, and possessed a formal, old-fashioned demeanor that many found cold and intimidating. Virginia Woolf, after meeting him, caustically described him in her diary as a lump of clay, dreary, morose, bored, and barren. While this was perhaps an overly harsh literary assessment, it captured a common perception of the Viscount as a dour and unromantic figure. He was, in essence, the very antithesis of the dashing but unavailable Joey Lee. The match was heavily championed by King George V and Queen Mary. They saw in Lord Leal not a romantic hero for their daughter, but a safe pair of hands. He was a man of unimpeachable character, immense wealth, and traditional values. He would provide Mary with a secure and stable life, and his vast fortune meant he would never be a drain on the public purse. The courtship, such as it was a formal affair conducted under the watchful eyes of her parents. They met at grand house parties and at the races. Their conversations were proper, their interactions chaperoned. There was no whirlwind romance, no passionate declaration of love. It was a carefully managed negotiation, a union of 2 great houses. On November 22, 1921, Buckingham Palace announced the engagement. The public reaction was one of immense excitement, tempered with a slight note of reservation. While thrilled at the prospect of a royal wedding, some in the press and public quietly questioned the significant age gap and the groom's rather formidable reputation. Was this truly a love match? Or was the nation's beloved princess being sacrificed on the altar of dynastic duty? But in the wave of patriotic fervor and excitement that followed, these quiet doubts were largely swept aside. The nation prepared for a fairy tale wedding. The wedding of Princess Mary and Viscount Lascelles on February 28, 1922, was a spectacle of breathtaking proportions. It was the first major royal event since the end of the war, and the nation seized upon it as a symbol of renewal and hope. Hundreds of thousands of people flooded the streets of London, a sea of cheering faces desperate to catch a glimpse of the princess. The wedding was a milestone in another way. It was the first royal occasion to be covered by the burgeoning fashion press, with magazines like Vogue dedicating pages to every detail of the bride's trousseau. Mary was a vision of bridal beauty. Her gown, a masterpiece of silver and pearl embroidery in a medieval style, was designed by the House of Windsor. Its long, elegant train shimmered as she made her way down the aisle of Westminster Abbey on the arm of her father, King George V. Her bridesmaids included a young, vivacious Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, the future wife of her brother Bertie, and the future Queen Mother. The ancient abbey was filled with royalty, aristocracy, and statesmen from across the empire. The ceremony was steeped in ancient tradition and regal pomp. Yet, amidst this joyous public spectacle, many observers noted the bride's almost unnerving solemnity. Her expression was one of serene composure, but it lacked the radiant, uninhibited joy of a young woman in love. Was this simply the solemnity of the occasion, the natural nerves of a bride on the world stage? Or was it a reflection of a deeper truth, a quiet resignation to the life of duty that now lay before her? As she stood at the altar beside the stern, much older man who was to be her husband, she was fulfilling the most sacred duty expected of her. She was securing her future, pleasing her parents, and giving the nation the celebration it craved. But in that moment, she may also have been quietly closing the door on the dreams and desires of her own heart. After the ceremony, the newly married couple appeared on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, to the thunderous roar of the crowd. It was a picture-perfect moment, a scene of national unity and celebration. But as the day drew to a close and the couple departed for their honeymoon, a new chapter of Mary's life was beginning. The cheering crowds faded into the distance. The grand spectacle was over. She was now the Viscountess, the wife of a man she barely knew, heading north to a new life in the vast, quiet landscapes of Yorkshire. The fairy tale as presented to the world was complete. The reality of her marriage, a life to be lived far from the familiar comfort of her family and the heart of the court, was just beginning. When the echoes of the cheering crowds in London faded, and the last piece of wedding confetti was swept from the streets, the reality of Princess Mary's new life began. She was now the Viscountess Lascelles, and her world had irrevocably shifted from the epicenter of the British monarchy to the vast green landscapes of Yorkshire. Her new home was initially Goldsborough Hall, a stately 17th-century manor house. While palatial by any normal standard, it was a world away from the familiar corridors of Buckingham Palace and Sandringham. Here she was not primarily a princess, but the wife of a powerful local magnate, a role with its own distinct and demanding set of duties. The adjustment was profound. Her husband Henry, or Harry as he was known, was a man whose soul was rooted in the soil of Yorkshire. He was a quintessential country squire, albeit one of the wealthiest in the entire kingdom. His days were consumed by the management of his sprawling estates, the breeding of racehorses, and the passionate pursuit of hunting and fishing. He was a man of few words, deeply private, and possessed a formal, almost brusque demeanor that many found intimidating. The glittering, gossipy world of London society held little interest in him. Mary, who had been raised at the very heart of that world, now had to adapt to a quieter, more isolated existence, governed by the rhythms of the seasons and the rituals of country life. Their partnership was, by all accounts, a formal one. It was a union built on a shared understanding of duty, property, and position, rather than on romantic love or intellectual companionship. While Lord Lelas was respectful and provided for her every need, ensuring she had the freedom and resources to pursue her charitable work, the emotional connection and warmth that Mary may have craved was largely absent. Their shared public appearances were a picture of dignified propriety, but in private they often pursued separate interests. He had his world of agriculture and the turf. She had her world of royal duties, nursing charities, and the local community, which she embraced with quiet dedication. She became the patroness of the Lides Triennial Musical Festival, a role she took very seriously and immersed herself in the life of the county, earning the deep and lasting affection of the famously plain-spoken people of Yorkshire. They saw in her not a distant, haughty princess, but a woman of genuine kindness, compassion, and tireless dedication. It was within the walls of Goldsborough Hall that Mary found her truest and most profound source of happiness: motherhood. In February 1923, she gave birth to her first son, George Henry Hubert Lelas. A year and a half later, in August 1924, her second son, Gerald David Lelas, was born. The arrival of her children unlocked a deep well of maternal affection within her, allowing her to create a family environment that was the polar opposite of the one in which she had been raised. Where her own childhood had been governed by nannies, strict routine, and emotional distance from her parents, Mary was a deeply involved, hands-on mother. She was determined that her boys would not suffer the same stifling formality. The nursery at Goldsborough was not a place of hushed tones and rigid discipline, but one filled with warmth, laughter, and a mother's devoted presence. She read to them, played with them, and took them on long walks through the estate gardens. She broke the royal mold, creating a home that was a sanctuary of love and normalcy amidst the grandeur of their surroundings. This conscious decision to parent differently reveals more about her inner character than any public speech ever could. It was a quiet rebellion against the emotional austerity of her own upbringing, a testament to her deep well of feeling and her desire to nurture and protect. Her sons became the undisputed center of her universe, the emotional anchor in a life that was often one of profound duty and quiet loneliness. In 1929, her husband's father, the 5th Earl of Herwood, died. Henry inherited the earldom, and Mary became the Countess of Herwood. The family moved into the Lelas' ancestral seat, the magnificent and imposing Herwood House. One of the grandest stately homes in England, Herwood was a treasure trove of priceless furniture by Thomas Chippendale and a world-class art collection that included works by Titian, Tintoretto, and El Greco. As the new countess, Mary became the chatelaine of this vast enterprise, a role she undertook with her characteristic efficiency and quiet grace. She oversaw the complex running of the household, entertained a stream of distinguished guests, and became the custodian of its immense cultural heritage. She was living the life she had been born and bred for, a life of immense privilege and equally immense responsibility. But even as she settled into her role as a great Yorkshire lady, The storms gathering within her own family in London were about to break, threatening to capsize the very institution she represented. The beginning of the end of her family's fragile peace came on January 20th, 1936, with the death of her father, King George V. Mary had been deeply devoted to him, and his passing was a profound personal blow. It also marked the moment the family's private anxieties became a matter of national crisis. Her eldest brother, David, now ascended the throne as King Edward VII. The crisis, of course, was his all-consuming obsessive love for Wallis Simpson, the twice-divorced American commoner whom he was determined to marry. For Mary, this was a catastrophe on multiple levels. As a devout Anglican and a woman for whom duty was the supreme virtue, the idea of her brother, the king, and head of the Church of England, marrying a divorce was a moral and constitutional nightmare. It was a flagrant violation of everything their parents had stood for. But more than that, it was a deep personal betrayal. She watched in anguish as her charming, beloved older brother seemed to cast aside his family, his country, and his sacred duty for one woman. She saw the immense pain it caused her mother, the Dowager Queen Mary, and the terrifying burden it was placing on her shy, stammering brother, Bertie, who was now next in line to the throne. Throughout the tense months of 1936, Mary was a key figure behind the scenes. She and her other brothers, Henry, Duke of Gloucester, and George, Duke of Kent, formed a united front, pleading with David to see reason. They were not just his subjects. They were his siblings who loved him and feared for the future of the monarchy. Mary reportedly wrote to him appealing to his sense of honor and family loyalty, but it was to no avail. David was immovable. He famously told his family that he could not live without the woman he loved, and if he could not have her as his queen, he would not be king. The final act came on December 11th, 1936. King Edward VIII abdicated the throne. The news struck the nation like a thunderbolt. For Mary, it was the confirmation of her worst fears. David, now the Duke of Windsor, went into a self-imposed exile, a diminished and controversial figure. And her beloved Bertie, the man who least wanted the crown, the man who battled a crippling speech impediment and a lifetime of self-doubt, was now King George VI. In that moment, Mary's role shifted. She was no longer just a supportive sister. She became a vital pillar of the new reign. She and her husband stood shoulder to shoulder with the new king and queen, the four of them projecting an image of unity, stability, and unwavering commitment to duty. A stark contrast to the selfish dereliction of the former king. She was there for Bertie, offering the same quiet, empathetic support she had given him in the nursery, now on the world stage. She was the unseen anchor, holding fast as the ship of state was rocked to its very foundations. The family had little time to recover from the abdication before an even greater crisis engulfed the world. The rise of Nazi Germany and the inexorable slide towards war cast a dark shadow over the late 1930s. When war was declared in September 1939, Mary, now 42, did not hesitate, just as she had in the First War. She immediately dedicated herself to national service. She was appointed Controller Commandant of the Auxiliary Territorial Service, or ATS, the women's branch of the British Army. This was a role of immense responsibility. At its peak, the ATS had over 200,000 women serving in a vast array of vital and often dangerous roles. Anti-aircraft gunners, radar operators, mechanics, drivers, and behind-the-scenes administrative staff. Mary was their figurehead and their most tireless advocate. She traveled relentlessly across the country and to theaters of war abroad, visiting units, inspecting barracks, and talking to the women about their work and their welfare. She was a familiar and reassuring sight in her smart khaki uniform, her quiet dignity and genuine interest boosting morale wherever she went. She faced the dangers of the Blitz alongside them, her car sometimes having to navigate through the rubble of freshly bombed cities to reach a scheduled inspection. Her work was a powerful symbol of the nation's total mobilization, a testament to the crucial role women were playing in the fight for survival. But while she was serving her country with unwavering resolve, the war would inflict a personal wound of unimaginable pain. Her youngest brother, Prince George, the Duke of Kent, was serving as an air commodore in the Royal Air Force. George was, in many ways, the most dazzling of the brothers after David. He was handsome, artistic, cultured, and possessed a rebellious, glamorous streak. He was a qualified pilot and adored flying. On August 25, 1942, he boarded an RAF Sunderland flying boat in Scotland for a flight to Iceland on a morale-boosting tour. The weather was poor. Shortly after takeoff, the plane crashed into a remote hillside in Caithness. Prince George and all but one of the 14 people on board were killed. He was just 39 years old. The news of his death was a devastating shock to the nation and a brutal blow to the royal family. It was the first time in over a century that a member of the royal family had died on active service. For Mary, the loss was catastrophic. She had already lost her father. She had, in a sense, lost her eldest brother to exile. Now, her youngest, most vibrant brother was gone, killed in the prime of his life. She was one of the family members who had to face the immediate shock, the one who had to provide comfort and strength to George's beautiful, grief-stricken widow, Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark, and their 3 small children, one of whom was just 6 weeks old. Once again, Mary suppressed her own profound grief to fulfill her duty to her family. She became a surrogate mother figure to her orphaned nephew and nieces, particularly the young Prince Edward, now the new Duke of Kent. She wrapped the shattered family in her quiet, steadfast care, ensuring they were supported and protected. The war had taken a terrible personal toll. The quiet princess from Sandringham had now seen the very worst of what life could inflict. She had witnessed the crumbling of her family through scandal and the brutal finality of death. She carried on as she always did, her public face a mask of calm composure. But her private world was now a place of profound and accumulating sorrow. The end of the Second World War brought a collective sigh of relief to a battered but victorious Britain. The nation celebrated its survival, but the world that emerged from the conflict was one of austerity, exhaustion, and profound change. The old certainties of empire were beginning to crumble, and a new socialist government was ushering in an era of radical social reform. For Princess Mary, the peace she had worked so tirelessly for brought not a respite, but a new chapter of personal loss and a transition into the final defining role of her life, that of the solitary matriarch. Her husband, Henry Lell, the 6th Earl of Herwood, had survived the war, but his health was failing. Theirs had been a partnership of duty and shared position rather than passionate love, but it had been the central stable structure of her adult life for a quarter of a century. On May 24, 1947, he died of a heart attack at Herwood House. At the age of 50, Princess Mary was a widow. The event marked a profound shift in her existence. The title of Countess of Herwood and the magnificent house itself passed to her eldest son, George. Mary, now the Dagger Countess, moved from the grand staterooms of the main house into Herwood Court, a smaller, more private residence on the estate. This physical move was symbolic of a deeper internal shift. She was no longer the Shatton of one of England's grandest houses, but a Dagger, a matriarch in the wings. While she remained deeply involved in the life of the estate in the county of Yorkshire, her focus turned ever more inward toward her immediate family. She found great joy in her sons and, in time, her grandchildren. Her eldest son, George, was a man of culture who would go on to become the director of the Royal Opera House, while her younger son, Gerald, was a passionate jazz enthusiast. She embraced their different paths, offering the quiet, non-judgmental support that had become her hallmark. These years were a period of relative calm, a quiet interlude where she could enjoy her family and her beloved Yorkshire, a brief autumn of peace before the final devastating blows to her generation of Windsor. The greatest and most painful of these blows was the slow, inexorable decline of her beloved brother, King George V. The immense strain of the abdication, followed by the relentless pressure of leading the nation through 6 years of war, had taken a terrible toll on Bertie's fragile health. A heavy smoker, he was diagnosed with lung cancer, and in 1951, he underwent a major operation to remove his left lung. The public was told he was recovering well, but within the family, the truth was known. The king was dying. For Mary, watching her shy, stammering brother, whom she had protected since childhood, slowly fade away was an agony. She had seen him rise to the occasion, overcoming his fears to become a deeply beloved and respected monarch, a symbol of the nation's resilience. Now she had to watch as that quiet strength was cruelly eaten away by disease. She made frequent visits, offering what comfort she could, a steadfast, silent presence by his side. On the morning of February 6, 1952, the king died peacefully in his sleep at Sandringham. He was just 56 years old. The news plunged the nation into a state of profound grief. For Mary, it was the loss of the sibling to whom she was arguably emotionally closest. She had lost her father. She had lost her vibrant youngest brother George to a violent accident. She had lost her eldest brother David to exile and scandal. And now Bertie, her gentle, beautiful Bertie, was gone too. Of the 5 brothers who had once filled the royal nursery with their noise and laughter, only 2 remained. David the outcast, and her younger brother Henry, Duke of Gloucester. She was now the senior sister, the keeper of memories for a generation of Windsor men that was rapidly disappearing. Her grief was compounded just over a year later by the death of her formidable mother, the 90-year-old Queen Mary, in March 1953. The Queen's passing just weeks before the coronation of her granddaughter, Elizabeth II, truly marked the end of an era. With her mother gone, Princess Mary was now the undisputed matriarch of her generation, a living link to a world of Victorian certainties that had long since vanished. The ascension of her niece to the throne ushered in the Second Elizabethan Age, and it defined a new role for Princess Mary. She was now the aunt of the monarch, a senior and deeply respected elder stateswoman within the family. At the magnificent coronation in June 1953, she rode in the state coach with her brother Henry, a symbol of the old guard, lending its solemn support to the new young queen. She was a key counselor of state, one of the few people constitutionally empowered to act on the monarch's behalf, and her experience was an invaluable asset to the young sovereign. Her relationship with Queen Elizabeth II was one of quiet, affectionate respect. In Mary, the new queen had not just an aunt, but a living example of a life dedicated to service, a woman who understood the immense personal sacrifices required by the crown. Mary never offered unsolicited advice, but her steadfast presence and unwavering support were a source of quiet strength for the young monarch as she navigated the early years of her reign. She also maintained a warm relationship with her other niece, the more volatile and glamorous Princess Margaret, offering a non-judgmental ear and a touch of old-world wisdom. In this new era, she also maintained her complex and poignant connection to her exiled brother, the Duke of Windsor. While the Queen Mother famously refused to forgive David for the abdication and the damage it had inflicted on her husband, Mary's feelings were more nuanced. She had been deeply hurt by his actions, but the powerful bond of sibling affection forged in childhood never entirely disappeared. She was one of the few members of the family who would occasionally visit the Duke and Duchess of Windsor in Paris or write to him. It was a quiet act of loyalty to the brother she had once adored, a testament to her belief that family ties, however strained, should not be completely severed. She was the bridge between the monarchy's painful past and its evolving present. The final decade of Princess Mary's life was lived largely out of the public spotlight, but it was a period of quiet purpose and contentment. She remained deeply rooted in Yorkshire, her adopted home for over 40 years. She was a beloved and familiar figure known for her work with local charities, her support for the Leeds Infirmary, and her passion for the arts. In 1951, she became the Chancellor of the University of Leeds, a role she took very seriously, presiding over graduation ceremonies and taking a keen interest in the university's development until her death. Her greatest personal passions in these later years were her gardens at Herwood Court and, above all, horse racing. The turf was a world she had shared with her husband, and she continued his legacy, becoming a knowledgeable and respected owner and breeder. The racecourse was one of the few places she could truly relax, sharing a laugh and a pair of binoculars with her daughter-in-law, the Queen Mother, and her niece, the Queen, two other royal women who shared her deep love for the sport. It was here, amidst the thrill of the race and the company of family, that the stern, beautiful princess could be seen at her most animated and at ease. As the years passed, she became a figure of living history. She had seen 7 different monarchs on the British throne, from her great-grandmother, Queen Victoria, to her niece, Elizabeth II. She had witnessed the Boer War, 2 world wars, and the Cold War. She had seen the British Empire reach its peak and then gracefully and sometimes painfully transform into the Commonwealth. She had seen society change beyond all recognition, from a world of horse-drawn carriages to the dawn of the jet age. Through it all, she had remained a constant, a symbol of a particular kind of British resilience, a woman who had weathered every storm with a quiet dignity that seemed to belong to another time. In the spring of 1965, while out for a walk with her eldest son and her grandchildren on the grounds of the Herwood estate, Princess Mary suffered a fatal heart attack. She collapsed and died in the landscape she had come to love so much. She was 67 years old. Her funeral was held at York Minster, a final farewell from her beloved adopted county, before she was laid to rest beside her husband on the Herwood estate. She was born to be the pride of Windsor, and in her own understated way, she fulfilled that role with an integrity and quiet fortitude that transcended the more dramatic narratives of her time. She endured a marriage of duty, witnessed the spectacular downfall of one brother, the reluctant rise and premature death of another, and the devastating sudden loss of her youngest. She was a silent observer, carrying the weight of her family's tragedies while diligently performing her own duties. Her life is a poignant reminder that privilege does not insulate one from pain, and that true strength is often found in the quiet, consistent act of carrying on. She may not have sought the spotlight, but her unwavering commitment, her quiet compassion, and her dignified endurance left an indelible mark. Princess Mary's story is an enduring echo of quiet duty, a testament to the profound power of a life lived with unwavering purpose, even when that purpose is tempered by profound sorrow. She was the unseen anchor, the steadfast sister, the quiet strength that helped hold the House of Windsor together through its most turbulent decades. And for that, she should be remembered not as the forgotten princess, but as one of its most remarkable and resilient members.